we have the opportunity, and we're going to take a look at this, to tap some research in the industry that has been pretty amazing. So in your pre-reading were two pieces that were research done by Community Brands. Hope you took a look at those. One was on career stage and engagement, member loyalty, and the other one was digital. We also gave you a number of some really good background information on some foresight trends. My goal at this point is to take you through just a high level look at those research and then send you into some rooms where you can have some deeper discussion. Now, what's interesting about research is that we get lots and lots of data points. Sometimes we get overwhelmed, and sometimes I've seen my board struggle and go like, I don't know where to start. And so what I often say is as we're going through this high level and as you read these, something's going to stop you, something's going to engage you. Go with that data point. It's not about digesting everything. It's about us using the data as we can in a process that's very intentional. So what I love about the Community Brands research, which was different in a number of ways, is that they were able to go through such a huge, wide swath in the association membership industry. So they tapped into people from lots of different walks of life, if you will, members, right? And they also had a chance to really get good cohorts in this study across the generations. And so that gave them the opportunity to make some interesting observations. The first and foremost is that it's not generational. What we're really seeing is a career stage difference. In fact, one of the things that we've really begun to understand is that as people move through their various the career pathway, there's subtle and not so subtle changes, and those subtle and not so subtle changes are how they look at your organization based on the value you're giving them that they need at that moment in time. You know, so we've talked about this before in previous years about how at this point we used to come out with the full laundry list, right? One of the things that we've begun to really understand is that as members, there's usually 2 or 3 things that are really relevant to us. What we further understand from this study is that those 2 or 3 things do in fact change. Do you segment your members by career stage already? Do you look at career stage when you are considering how you are positioning products and services? So this might be an interesting or different way for you to have a conversation with your boards and your program teams to begin to take a little bit of a different look. But one of the interesting things that we found out is around this career stage. And so I want to give you some high-level looks at this. So when do members join? Well, it turns out that the largest number of members that join are actually going to be early in their career. So we used to, many associations, and this may not be necessarily true for you, but let's look at this from let's step back and look at it from the holistic standpoint. Many folks think about, you know, I got to get the students in, I got to bring the people in as they're coming in, as they're thinking about careers. Well, what we're finding out is that decision to join is more often happening in about those first 5 years. So after they've graduated, a little bit before the job, but we begin to see a trajectory of once people are thinking about the job, they're thinking about the association. Now that may not be necessarily a real shock. No, I didn't think it was all that surprising. What we've started doing here in my association is beginning to ask ahead of time, and in all of our marketing is to begin to say, if they're early in their career, if they're just getting involved in the career, we've got to go with them with a different message. And that's really been able to make a difference there. Let me ask this real quick question. What do you think is the benefit that mid-careerists value much? Let me suggest to you that industry information based on our survey is actually top of mind, followed by training. And in fact, the job opportunities and moving forward is lower on the list. This is one of those nuances that really is valuable for us to understand so that we can truly customize. It is interesting because members who are really early in their career are much more interested in advancement benefits. So training, raising awareness, this notion of moving things forward. Later, which I thought was real interesting, is that yes, the value of the code of ethics, advocacy, is really something that's going to track with people who have been really secure, I would call them, later in their career. Now, again, this is just highlighting that the benefits, the value of membership changes throughout the career, and that we really need to look at how we're offering things and making some distinctions. And one additional caveat I want to make is that no, not every mid-careerist is going to show up this way, but the majority of them do. So taking a look at this, the reason why people join networking, socializing, and opportunities, which is really critical as a join, actually is very different than oftentimes with what they think is valuable and what they will renew. So the join, which is often around networking, socializing, it's around meeting people, gives way to industry information as well as the code of ethics and representing interests. So as we look at this, what it tells us is another important piece of information, that not only do I have different needs and values around when I look at the organization over my career, but it also suggests, I think quite importantly, that the decision to join is often triggered differently than the decision to renew. And part of that matches along what we're seeing in terms of the differences here. Let's take another look at how those later in their career feel less connected and potentially less satisfied with their organization, yet we count on them. So what this is particularly showing you is that if you look at the early folks, the early careerists, they tend to have that connection and that satisfaction a little bit higher, right, than some of the others. As you can see here in their sense of connectivity, their sense of satisfaction. But then as you begin to look at how that plays out when we get into the retention cycle, you see that the likeliness to renew goes down for those early folks, and the net promoter score is actually a little bit lower. So in essence, I think that this is really suggesting that two things. One is the importance of us really re-emphasizing, really giving great intentionality around establishing and reestablishing that value year over year. I'm going to join, I'm motivated, and what we're finding with the early careerists is that they're very motivated when they first join to get involved and engaged. We have to work with them, we have to keep them connected, we have to show that value as they go through their career path in order for them to increase their likelihood to renew and to get that net promoter score up. I think that the other thing it tells us is that, so sometimes we have folks later in their career, we expect them to stay around because they've been with us, right? But there is, if you guys have done any lifetime value work, you will know that there is generally kind of an average. For one of the groups I manage, our average is 10 years. So I sort of have an understanding that even though they're people that I've been relying on, that the stickiness may not be there as clearly. So one of the things that this basically is just affirming in my reading of this is it's affirming that we need to emphasize that value year over year. We have to take that value and make sure that it is tracking with the career stage, and we have to tamp down our expectations that the folks that have been around are just going to hang. The last sort of piece that I really want to show you here that came out of this comes from pulling several of these data points together. And as you pull these data points together, it helps provide this kind of a gap analysis that really helps us see where we have some opportunities that we may need to spend some more time on. So what's really interesting is that targeted valuable content, gathering feedback, and job opportunities are basically elements that we could potentially ramp the game up on to create better value or stickiness. We're doing pretty well with these other elements, right? The question is, if you are in a situation and you're trying to make a decision of where do I invest time or energy, where do I put some priorities, the things that you are doing well on that you kind of have just, you know, they're on steady as she goes, may allow you to give way to amping up some of the other value points here. So for example, this whole notion of gathering feedback is an arena where many of us are really, I believe, building some serious skills around, and largely we're building the skills around this because we're in a time right now where we have to listen, and everything is changing. So one of the things I think that we're approaching now, I know with my groups, we're doing more listening conversations where we're doing very informal idea swaps. People are coming in, we're just coalescing and listening to them. What do you need? We're doing more one question, two question polls. This gathering of the feedback and then feeding it back to them, so it's a wonderful loop, is an area of opportunity from the research pre-pandemic, right? That I think is a skill set that we're already building, and how, wow, could that be a stickiness, right? That really benefits us down the road. Okay, shifting from the study on that whole member loyalty and around career stages and understanding some of maybe these underutilized products or services, and how can we shift some things, we look at very quickly the technology study or the digital study. So let me ask this next question. How many of you take your phone into the bathroom with you? So what I love is that in the survey, when they asked folks under the age of 23, 80% of them said they take this in with them. One of the things that I think is really critical for us to understand is that we live in this digital connected world. One of the Foresight studies is all around the fact that that we have a whole new way of socializing, and we have a digital tribe, right? Our friends are around. More than half of all website traffic now is done on this little device, right? More and more folks are turning to this. They're expecting to be able to use this. Transfer money, pay bills, register, look information up, get their directions, socialize. And so as we look at that, there's a number of elements that we really need to be geared into for our organizations. For example, registering for events. 68% say they want to do it on mobile, but yet most of us are still thinking in terms of as long as I have it available on desktop. Job boards, more people are now moving up to looking for jobs right on their mobile device. Are we prepared for that? And professional education and continuing education, I think, is a really big one where we have to begin to understand. Interesting thing about this point is that in the one group that I manage, we have a lot of government employees. And government employees were, for quite a while, were locked out of Zoom. And so the way that they were able to join in many cases was to bypass that by not going on their computer, but using their mobile device. It opened my eyes to how many people were on Zoom in our meetings on their phones. So it's very connected, very digital connected. And if we want to compete, we absolutely have to optimize digital, switch to mobile. I'm going to shift us now because that's kind of, I'm going to call that a little bit here and now, a little bit in the weeds, like what products and services are we offering? Are we doing mobile or website? What social media channels? And I want to take us back. I want us to step way back and get real big. So my strategic thinkers, the folks here that are really interested and engaged around the conversation of the big picture, are going to like this next thing. I don't know, those of you that are CEDs, if you've heard of Jeff DeCania, go ahead and put your thumbs up. He is quite a thinker in this particular space. And what I want to do is I use the data from the community brands and actually from a lot of other sources to help me understand the here and now. But I realize that I have to always hold that up against what's coming. The duty of foresight is perhaps one of the most important things that boards can do. Now, I will say, as Jeff has said here, it really takes a discipline, right? We have to strengthen our ability to both perform by asking questions, listening, but it also takes us strengthening our critical thinking around these things. What to me is really important about foresight is that it allows us to make decisions that position for the future, and it allows us to be ready to make decisions on the cusp. So the best example that I can give you came when we all had to go and work remotely. So I have a number of clients, and I talked with a couple of clients, and the clients fell into two categories. The folks that had a telecommuting policy and had remote workers and had invested in things like Microsoft Teams, they almost without skipping a beat, right? Then there were the clients for whom, well, if I don't see you, I don't know that you're working, right? They struggled. They lost productivity at first because they were having to set things up. All of a sudden they had people working at home and they didn't have anything. So the folks over here had looked at the foresights, had looked at and realized what was coming down the pike, understanding digital, and they were prepared. Let me give you another example. There was an associate, actually, I think we're up to I count to 5 now, 5 associations who pivoted their annual conference. The reason why they could do that was because they had technology they were used to. Some of them are already doing hybrid. They're doing some level of live streaming. So the real question that we have here that we need to understand is, how can we become the thinkers, the questioners that allow us to get ourselves out in front rather than constantly trailing? Now, we sent you all of the drivers, and I asked you to look at a couple in particular, and I'm going to bring those up in just a moment. There's a very intentional process. If you're really interested, if you really want to dig deep into the Foresight Works, and you are a an ASAE member, there I go, I'm slipping from my other association, an ASAE member, I would highly recommend that you maybe go through some of their Foresights training. Essentially, they're looking at a pretty robust process. And it's about taking the drivers and framing what's important to you, getting additional information, creating a baseline, and then you're taking a look at what are your alternative futures. There's usually a visioning component, a planning, and of course an acting component. Now, I don't know. I think that that's a rigorous process that is worth doing, but in the event that you need to have a quick and dirty one right now, let me suggest to you that what we're going to be talking about with the Foresight drivers, there's 3 steps. I want you to use these to jumpstart the strategic conversation. I want you to take the opportunity to say to the board, here's a bunch, which are the 2 or 3 that resonate with us? What should we get a deeper dive in? Allow that to spur discussions on potential impacts. So for one organization that I'm working with, really interesting, there's 46 drivers now, I think it is. They culled that down to 12 that they thought were important, and each month they are taking a look at one of them. So, and you don't have to even go with 12, go with 3 or 4. We've highlighted a couple for you so that you can take a look at this. The other element of this, another way of using this, is to just engage your members in conversation around this. You see, all the Foresight drivers that are important to you in the chapter are probably important to your own homeowners associations, and very likely important to some of those homeowners themselves. So maybe engaging the members becomes a value prop add. Remember that access to knowledge, access to information was important across all, but particularly important across those the folks coming in and they're really hungry. Maybe engaging the members becomes the value add prop that creates the stickiness that you need. And there are a couple of drivers in there in particular that really resonate, by the way, with early careerists. So it could be really a way for you to drive some engagement at some different levels. And finally, and this is what we're going to be doing, in just a moment as we are going to talk about some of these drivers. So we sent you a whole bunch, and then we also sent you these couple and said, take a look at these. The Foresight Works came out of ASAE. They brought a number of small groups together, and then they coalesced them to larger and yet larger groups, and they're constantly scanning, and they're bringing in subject matter experts. And the goal is a living, breathing project. So it has grown. It started with 41 drivers, and I believe it's up to 46 drivers. The notion was to find those elements, those things that are coming around the pike that are going to make a difference for us in terms of how we have to act, how we have to allocate dollars, our experiences around our workers, our experience around our members, our experiences around the community. Things are going to have impact on us. And one of the things I did, just to kind of help us maybe focus a little bit, was I brought these up as some of the ones that I thought to myself, well, I know that these are important for many chapters, and I believe potentially for you and your members. And so let me just go through a couple of these. So immigration-driven demography is really about, it's reshaping not only what we look like, but very critically values and attitudes. And that reshaping in terms of what our demographics are means that we're going to have different expectations. The important thing here is to understand that even though our current boards or the membership when we first look at has a certain size or shape, coming very quickly is a significant change in that. Now, mentoring 2.0. So here's an interesting thing. I don't know if you guys have thought much about this, but this whole group of boomers, me included, are exiting. And as we exit, what we're seeing is this whole next generation coming in, but we're exiting, and particularly thanks to this pandemic, in some cases exiting before we're able to do that institutional knowledge transfer. Mentoring is a great way for sharing organizational knowledge, for really helping people learn from the history without missing what's coming down the future. And it is a way of learning that is favored by the new generations, the digital generations. So the question is, are we offering mentoring on our boards, in our memberships? Are we creating ways for us to be able to really engage in this? New forms of work. So think of this as all of the independent professionals, the new career paths. What is interesting about this is the word independent, right? So you're going to see, we're already seeing right now with the gig economy, right? You are going to see where we're looking at folks that, amongst other things, don't have the same constraints that traditional workforce has in terms of hours, time, where they're working, what they're doing, how they're choosing to do what they're doing. It also, though, and I think this comes up in a couple of the other ones, as you look at independent professionals, and as you look at more gig workers, you're also seeing another thing that's happening, and that is going to be the impact on benefits, health benefits, and the ability to invest in their own development. So beware of that, because that could give us some openings. And the new career paths, we're really seeing that rather than people looking at a hierarchical, I'm going to walk up a career path, it's way more flexible and it's fluid. And that fluidity is going to catch people. They may not be early careerists, but they may act like early careerists, right? So it gives us an opportunity in a couple of different ways. I did rejection of expertise for a very important reason. And we're seeing this play out in the political front amazingly, but also in the science front. And that is this notion of moving away from the credentialed subject matter expert and from the gatekeeper, the traditional sources of information, to a much more almost informal, someone who calls themselves an expert. And I don't want to make this disparaging, because I mean, in some ways it's allowing us to get more voices in, but it has an impact on us as associations. It has an impact on how people are going to potentially value what we're saying and bringing. The real opportunity here is, how do you embrace new voices and then help them get the credentialing will make a difference. Reputation by numbers. How many credentials do you have versus your innate abilities and attributes? We're seeing a shift, and we think it's going to speed up with the access of data to allow you to pick people for a lot of other elements other than that they went to an Ivy League school or they have this many of degrees or et cetera, et cetera. Access versus ownership in the sharing economy. Big thing you have to look at here is the blurring of commercial versus person to person. And the fact that we know that the buying patterns are going to be different for the generations that are coming in than they have been for the pretty solid group of individuals we have in here. And that's going to be, that's going to put different expectations. It's simple as, how do I pay for my membership in terms of pricing models, in terms of when I pay, to more complex things about why do I have to pay when it should be easily accessible. The shifting environment for content. This is a big one that I think too many of us have given, I'm going to say, short shrift on, okay? First of all, we no longer own the content of our space. There's dozens of places to get it, and very easy to set up training on it. You've seen how many webinar requests and invites you get. So there's a couple things that are happening. There's a change to delivery channels. The print is not what it used to be. I want to be it on mobile. All of those channels are changing, and as we get more sophisticated, and this is something I want you to think about, all of a sudden the learning curve for learning digitally has gone like, ooh, right? People are just they're jumping onto and learning how to do it. So it used to be like, oh, get them a lift to get them on the webinar. Then they get on, once they got something, then they're moving like this. They've embraced it. So delivery channels are shifting. It's going to impact pricing models, but content personalization, I think, is going to be one of the biggest things for us to fight with. People do not want the generic e-letter. Socializing reshaped. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We talked about digital, but this notion of digital tribes. I don't have to change physical location to socialize, and even more, I don't have to change it to work. That's going to change lots of our attitudes. I don't think it's going to mean an end to face-to-face. Wouldn't we all still rather be in a room together, right? It's not going to get rid of that, but it does mean that you're going to have to prove that there's value for me to come out, because I can get a lot of education other places. Well, do I have to even say anything on this? We kind of already know from all the polls, but I think the social and the economic inequality is the one that we're really seeing thrown in our face right now. And that's important, because how do you have conversations around the board? How do you have conversations in your membership? How do you deal with that in your day-to-day operations as a chapter? Obviously, do I have to say more about virtualized meetings? I believe we're all here. Well, I do have to say something. You see, tactile is bandwidth, right? Tactile is bandwidth. We're almost there. And I think that who owns the data, it could go, there's two directions people are talking about right now. They're talking about the fact that as consumers, we will have less and less control, but then they're also talking about as we get more savvy, we will take more and more control over that. We live and die, big business lives and dies by data. And if consumers shut us out, it's going to make a difference. So, and of course, you know, all the privacy laws that have changed and shifted are a bit different. All right. Those are just the quick ones, right? Those are the quick ones that I wanted to be able to talk to you about. What I'd love to do is to have a conversation. As you look at the engagement research, and think of it as both the career stage as well as thinking about it in terms of the digital. What is relevant to you in your chapter about that research? How can you act on it? But the real recap here is understanding career stage and understanding that as I go through the career stage, what I value is going to change. And if I am going to keep members, engage members more deeply, I have to be able to shift and show them that. So it's about customizing marketing. It's about customizing communications. It's about customizing programs and services. How can you act on that? And what's one thing that'll make a difference for you, right? And then take some time. The foresight drivers, is there a call to action for you? Is there one of those is like a wake up? I mean, I think the pandemic and the protests alone are a call to action for us. You look at the drivers, which if I'd done this with you, conversation with you back in December, some of these you might have gone, and now they're here, right? So the question is, what do you do with this information? And so what I'm going to suggest is that we go ahead and jump into some meeting rooms and have some conversation. What I'd love to do now is share some of the highlights that you guys had in this conversation. So what resonated in your group? What can you share with the full group?
We actually really focused a lot on some ideas for how to engage and keep our business partners happy, and just we had a ton of ideas that we're going to come back to national with some asks. You know, we're concerned because a lot of what they get from the organization is face-to-face and networking. And so they support our chapters so much where we want to keep them happy. We're trying to kind of strike a balance between using their expertise for the volunteer leaders and the management companies, and so there's kind of a win-win. So we're looking at those sort of opportunities. We had an idea of we're trying to do these mini webinars with, and we might have gotten the idea from someone else, but like if you're a pool company, we'll have a mini webinar on reopening your pools, and then the volunteer members and manager members can attend that, and then they get to be spotlighted, the business partner.
This is Melanie. Hello. So that was an exciting idea, maybe commercial tips from business partners that you could run via video, however. And then our other idea was maybe some sort of software that allowed for management companies and managers to do kind of bid searches, if you will, through the membership directory. So as a manager, I go on and I say, within these parameters, I need a new insurance quote, or I need a new landscaping company, and it needs to fit within this. You need to service this location, maybe being able to attach your scope, and then that gets pushed out to the business partner members that fit within those parameters, and they then can contact back the manager. That would be a real time saver on the management company side. For me, having to physically open the membership directory or on the computer and search and email and phone call separate people. And we thought that that's a potential idea. And I think that one of the things that we said is ideas like this is, how can we all band together instead of each individual chapter creating their own ideas?
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, Melanie, for a couple of reasons. One is that it ties into all of the research, right? This notion of digital, this notion of meeting people where they are, finding them along that continuum, but then also the drivers related to this notion of virtualization and digitization and access to content. So that's sort of how we can use the research to catalyze. That's great.
The unique thing we found, 2 of our chapters are the entire state with a lot of rural areas. And so it goes beyond your membership categories. How do you engage your members when they're all over the state in different areas, different concerns? And so it's a real challenge. We've done surveys. We found out, virtual surveys don't really bring the information in. Physical surveys, when they come to a luncheon or an event, you don't get everybody. And so it's really hard to measure engagement and what they want out of CAI when you have such a diverse group beyond just the membership category.
Right. So one of the things I've seen, I don't know if any of you have tried this, are the virtual focus groups. So really just, because you're right. I mean, how many of us want to do another survey? One of the cool chapters that I worked with about 4 months ago, they use in their Facebook group, they use the polling and they get phenomenal response from people that wouldn't otherwise. But anybody tried the virtual focus groups, and it's different. You limit it to 3 or 4 people, or you think to yourself, okay, 8 people, and then that's it. And the conversation is really, what are you working on, and what do you need from us? But I just saw the chat pop up and say, really embracing hybrid events to get that spread out geography, which is awesome.
Well, we were talking about some of the different avenues and being able to spotlight our business partners who are getting less of that personal touch than they have signed up for, than they've gotten in the past, and how to refocus that. And we're looking at a few of those on sponsorships of the webinars that we are doing, whether they're a sign-up partner, a response partner, whether we're looking at doing video, like a minute video, depending on what your sponsorship level are. We're using them during the events. We've also started the CAI Minute, I think it was, is what we were calling it, spotlight vendor partners with a quick video, 1-minute video attached to the newsletter and other topics. So finding other ways to get them out there, because we don't have the touch point, at hosting meetings. So.
Right. One of the things I ran across recently about, this is a partner sponsorship tip. I have not tried it, but the person who did it said to me, it has been like 5 stars. You know how we'll do a video or webinar, right? And we'll archive it so people can go back and look at it. Just like YouTube, this chapter is putting the bumper videos for their partners at the front end that you listen to, giving them like this incredible 15-second spot. And I'm going to have to see a bumper video. Katie says that several California chapters doing the bumper videos. And then the other thing that I picked up from somebody is Swag Box. So there's a company called Swag Up. You can create a whole box. I went ahead and got the sample pack so I could see it. One of the things we're thinking about doing is a COVID care kit to our members and have a partner do it.
In our breakout room, again, we were sharing ideas for our business partners. And Robin from Kentucky's chapter, she shared with us a video that they put out where they did small sections of business partners, board members, reading off a little sign saying that we're here for you and all of that. We've sent out email blasts for a month highlighting, we split our business partners into 4 different lists, highlighted them each week, a different group, linking it to their website.
Well, then let me ask this question, because part of what we were talking about is with the drivers. One of the things that we can do with the drivers is begin to predict what is coming down the road. Now, most folks are suggesting, and by folks I mean economists and then looking at the meeting planners and those kind of stuff, that meetings as usual will not be happening in 2020 and may not be in 2021 either. Like the big move back to some of those things, if it comes, may happen the end of 21. So the good news, bad news is that at the same time, what we're tracking is that, as I mentioned earlier, that learning curve, that interest, that willingness to do all kinds of socializing and learning digitally is growing. So the question is, it may not be for us in chapters to say, we just have to get through till the meetings come back. We may have to think holistically about what the future of meetings is and think about it, really very differently. So I guess that's just one example. When you look at those drivers, are there drivers, other drivers that you see as being, wow, I don't know, maybe, is there what other drivers are really resonating with you guys?
Hi, I'll jump in. This is Annalisa Lutz
Thank you.
from Orange County. The new way of working which is the virtual part, and specifically in California, what, if anything, is the impact of our statewide law, the Davis-Sterling Act, to enable boards and therefore managers to conduct board meetings virtually beyond COVID, so that it could potentially have a transformational impact on managers who won't have to drive around to different meetings and be on the road and then spend a lot of time at meetings. And therefore, maybe there's a chance of having increased retention in the industry.
So that's exactly the kind of way to use the drivers. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's a great example of how something that's happening right now could really be the future. And what are we doing now? And you want to have stickiness of membership. It's having those conversations that they're having in Orange County now, because you're telling your members, wow, we're paying attention, we're forward thinking, and we're anticipating. And you might even go, well, is virtual meetings good? I don't know. How do you now pivot your training and education to teach folks, your members, to have incredible virtual meetings? Are you doing virtual facilitation programs? Are you helping them really amp their program? Are you as a chapter looking at your technology budgets and saying, what's the impact going forward on where we're going to spend our dollars? We can't presume that the next normal, because remember, these drivers were already in place. So thank you. Tony mentioned content was another big one, which is a huge thing as we look at particularly a driver for early careerists.
And this was part of what we did prior to COVID happening. We've broken out content versus, we call it the manager learning design team, which is really focusing on the delivery method, not specific to content, but how can we go about making it more interesting, more, driving it more to CAI as the educator of choice, because we all have those vendors out there that are going to go into the individual managers' offices and do their education directly to them. But we're trying to really get, how can we become that focus point when somebody says, hey, how do we get educated on this? Well, CAI is the answer. So we're focusing on how can we develop the delivery method, and again, not the content, but the how, what makes it exciting.
And I think there's 2 points that you're making that I really like. And I love the way you're coming at this, because it's like, how do we become the choice? And so there's 2 things that strike me. One is, the format, the technology. How are ours different than anybody else's? Like, you can go to a lot of webinars. We're trying here to put you in breakout rooms and use polling and stuff like this. How do we enrich the process? So that's certainly one of it. But the other element is the planning curve. How do I shrink the planning curve so that when something comes up, so for my one chapter, we're pretty lean, but when COVID came up, the first thing the board did was they said, here are the 5 questions that we have to deal with. And we, on a dime, took our spring and shifted it. How can you ramp up for content? So any thoughts on that?
Well, so the example to the softwares that you guys were talking about, our team, our staff, Leslie and Amy, really jumped in and found some tools that we could utilize. I mean, our annual meeting is planned for the end of July, and as soon as we started this, they were able to jump in, find us softwares. So we immediately shifted into the go-tos and the webinars, that software. And now we're on the hop in to be able to do the type of thing we're doing today, to be able to facilitate we didn't cancel. We just shifted focus and reworked it, and they've done a fantastic job of getting us ready to go.
Right. So I love Rachel's in reflecting on that, is saying, but how do we market it going forward to sustain the chapter? So that's really is the question, is how do we make it so that I'll pay for it? And I like to tell the story of I spent $49 on a 3-hour, 2.5 hour, technically 2.5 hour facilitation webinar. Now, I was given in that week, I had 4 choices of facilitation webinars, 3 free, 1 paid. And it was the fact that it was going to be a smaller group on a meetings platform so that we would have really good dialogue and test. So I love that. I think that we can find the value.
Hi guys. So we were talking about Tony talking about content and my least favorite word of the year, pivoting. In this, I refuse to say new normal, this world we live in. So I mean, we closed our office on March 17th, and at the same time canceled every program we had through the end of April at that point. And now we've canceled every in-person event and program for the remainder of the year, with maybe one exception for golf. So, and we had to pivot our content. So what we did was we took our regularly scheduled program and just kind of kicked it down the hall a little bit. And for the last 2 months, we've been doing only COVID focused content. And so we're rolling it out about 10 days ahead of the session date because we want it to be super fresh. So we did, the first one was, what the heck is a stay-at-home order and what does it mean to you? Because no one ever really had one of those, right? We've got one tomorrow about, we're up here in Northern Virginia and DC. We're still in phase 1 here today. So tomorrow we're doing a how to reopen, and obviously we're going to have that dreaded pool conversation. And so we went very specific with our content, but we are getting back to regularly scheduled programs. And so we'll start providing the regular content that is still applicable. And we are virtual. And one of the ways, while we are feeling here at the DC chapter a severe impact on our chapter operations for the remainder of this year and for next year, a dramatic and severe impact, we are moving ahead with our content. We have monetized our webinars. Sponsors are happy. People are paying registration fees. We are making a net profit on them. And so that's good. But everything's going to be different. The technology is different. One of the ways we're making sure that the content is good quality, right? Because you can't throw up a webinar and not have good quality, or have a bad virtual platform and expect people to come back again. And we need them to keep coming back, even in Zoom fatigue. So we have dress rehearsals with our speakers a day or so before, so we can talk to them about, hey, you know what? The Zoom background we're using is blue. Don't wear a blue shirt. You look like a floating head. So we go through all that ahead of time. We have a script. It takes two staff people to run a virtual meeting so that one of us can be watching the chat window and the Q&A window. Someone else is on the waiting room or a technology fail. So it takes just as much logistics as it does for an in-person meeting.
Yeah, it does. And I was involved with an event just shortly ago, and we talked about the fact that, we were getting, there was not great things about it. So maybe this is going to really, truly be a better one. We do have to crack the pricing model. And it's going to become important for you guys to continue to have important dialogues around this. The example I shared with you this morning about the one chapter, that 8-hour program was a $1,200 price point, and they sold out. They had they put the best technology on. One chapter didn't do it. A couple of chapters pulled together to make that happen. So there's opportunities here, guys. All right, this is what I want you to do. You've invested some time to spend with us. So the question is, how are you going to make this investment work for you? And the way the investment will work for you is if you take the moment now to say, what am I going to do after this is over? How am I going to act on the information after it's over? When reality hits, the important point is that you've got at least one action item coming out of this to make sure that the investment that you've made today keeps paying. This is a deep conversation, and it's worth coming back to with your boards. And we just wanted to give you show you a way of doing this by having a driver and having some conversations.
If you have any questions, please contact a member of the Chapter Relations team or email chapterlearning@caionline.org.